Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I was folding laundry in the den when Talia's words cut through the hush like glass shattering on stone. My hands paused over a small t-shirt. Ours, once ours. And for a heartbeat, I felt nothing but the gentle rhythm of the clothes rustling. Then I heard her voice, calm and certain. I'm going to be Nina's surrogate. 6 years of marriage. 3 children whose laughter still echoed between these walls. A life stitched together in lullabies and bedtime stories. And with a single breath, she unraveled it all. I dropped the shirt, the soft cotton landing in a quiet, accusing heap. Her words hovered between us, impossible to retrieve. In that stillness, I measured the distance between us for the first time. Before tonight, I believed we were partners, equal architects of this family. We had navigated sleepless nights and spilled cereal, celebrated milestones and survived scars. Our home was a refuge, the beating heart of everything we built together. But standing there, under the gentle glow of the lamp by the laundry basket, she felt like a flawless stranger whose face I recognized but whose heart I did not. Nina's surrogate. Derek's embryo. Secret plans I had never been invited to share. The weight of her declaration pressed down on me, mingling with the stale scent of detergent and the faint undertones of my youngest baby lotion. I folded the next shirt with mechanical precision, each crease a silent question. How could she decide this without me? How could the woman who once whispered, "I love you," beneath a moonlit sky now speak of another's child as her own mission? She watched me, her eyes steady, as if she had practiced this moment in secret script, and I was the actor who failed to learn his lines. Your body, your decision, she said softly, as though that settled everything. But what of my body? My mind? My dreams of growing old together, hand in hand? What of the promises we made beneath that wedding arch? Those vows seemed to dissolve in the air between us. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter, letting the grain of the wood steady me. The humming of the refrigerator sounded reckless in the sudden chaos of my pulse. I pictured the conversations I would have with Derek, Nina's husband, my brother-in-law, the silent conspirator in this betrayal. I imagined the bright, hopeful text messages they exchanged, the schedules meticulously plotted around her cycle, the secret ultrasounds she'd smile at alone. How many nights had she lain beside me, warmed by my touch, while her mind reached elsewhere? My children's faces flashed across my vision, my son's crooked grin, my daughter's matching curls. They belonged to me, to us. Yet here I was, a stranger in my own home, stripped of any say in its future. A faint creak on the staircase signaled her approach. I sensed her before she spoke again, her footsteps cautious. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, voice trembling now. But the tremor came too late. The damage was already done. Guilt and resolve warred inside me. I could forgive a mistake. I could understand a desire to help a sister in need. But secrets at the core of a marriage? That demanded more than an apology. It demanded a reckoning. I straightened, gathering the laundry basket and carrying it to the bedroom without meeting her gaze. Each step was deliberate, fueled by a newfound hardness. In our bedroom, I arranged the folded clothes on the bed. The familiar routine felt surreal, as though I inhabited someone else's life. I turned at her light touch on my shoulder, expecting remorse. Instead, I saw determination, a fierce, unmoving will that chilled me more than any winter's night. This is important, she said, and I recognized the unspoken truth beneath her words. Nothing I felt or wanted would matter if it stood between her and this baby. She moved past me, leaving a cold draft where her warmth once lived. That night, I lay awake in our bed, the dark room a cavern echoing with memories. In the dim glow of the digital clock, I counted the seconds since her declaration, 360, 720, too many to bear. I heard Talia breathing beside me, a soft, steady rhythm that once comforted me. Now it felt foreign, a reminder of how little she shared with me. I traced the curve of her shoulder in the dark, recalling how her presence used to soothe every fear. But tonight, her warmth felt like the embers of a fire I could no longer rekindle. I felt my heart harden, an instinct to protect the pieces of my life she threatened to scatter. When sleep finally claimed me, it brought no dreams. Only a restless void. I awoke at dawn, the sky pale and unforgiving. The laundry lay folded, waiting. I dressed and poured coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood. Talia was still asleep, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest a luxury I no longer felt entitled to share. I sipped my coffee in silence, staring out the window at a world that continued without pause. Birds flitted across the yard, oblivious to the gravity of human betrayal. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a court where I stood accused, stripped of all defense. I folded the unfolded shirt from the night before and set it aside. It was time to face the new reality. I would speak to a lawyer, protect my children, and reclaim what was mine. I would not let this silent trespass go unanswered. Betrayal doesn't arrive in fireworks. It seeps in through unlocked doors and unspoken plans until you wake to find your entire world rearranged. Talia had rewritten our story, but I would write the next chapter on my own terms. And as I left the room to begin that fight, I realized I no longer saw her as my partner. I saw her as the stranger who'd shattered everything I loved, and I swore I would not let her remain unchallenged. I watched them through the crack of the half-open door. Talia perched on the arm of the couch, Derek Fallon nestled into the cushions, and Nina sprawled between them, her laughter light and unguarded. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping the room in gold and shadow, disguising the tension in their smiles. They talked in hushed tones, rifling through paperwork and schedules as if plotting a lavish vacation, when in reality they were orchestrating my family's undoing. My chest tightened at every syllable I overheard. They spoke of hormone injections and dietary restrictions, of ultrasound appointments, and early morning blood draws. They spoke of my wife's body as though it were a rented vessel, theirs to navigate. I stayed hidden, leaning against the frame, the grain of the wood rough under my palm. My heart pounded with a rising anger so vibrant I could taste it, bitter, metallic, urgent. I had seen the fertility meds in the fridge, the shipping labels addressed to Nina and Derek. I had guessed something was amiss. But compared to this secret symposium of medical minutiae, it felt like child's play. They weren't whispering about a surprise party or planning a baby shower in the living room. They were planning the next 9 months of my wife's life, and I was the only person in that home who knew nothing. I swallowed hard, my Adam's apple bumping painfully against my jaw. My throat closed as I forced the words from my mind. I pushed the door wider, stepping into the sunlit room like a blade cutting through silk. They froze, mid-smile. Nina's face crumpled first, surprise and guilt flickering in her eyes. Derek's hand tightened around his coffee mug, and Talia's cheeks flushed that familiar rosy hue, the one that used to signal childbirth or triumph, not shame. "Why are you doing this here?" I asked, voice low but steady. My words rippled through the air, and they all looked at me as though I were an intruder in the story of my own life. Derek set his mug down carefully, as if negotiating with porcelain would calm this storm. "We just wanted to make sure Talia is comfortable," he said, nodding toward her swollen belly. "Planning is easier here, she knows the space." He tilted his head. "You didn't mind?" I blinked at him, my vision blurry with disbelief. "Mind?" I echoed. "You turned my living room into your base of operations without so much as a text? A heads up? I'm her husband, and apparently I'm also a roadblock." My voice cracked with fury and heartbreak. It wasn't just the intrusion that stung. It was the ease with which they excused their betrayal. Talia's eyes glinted, defiant and cold. She placed a hand on her stomach and shrugged. "If it bothers you, then buy me a chair at your house or rent me an apartment next door. But don't act like I'm not doing something meaningful." Her tone held a pride that turned my blood to ice. Meaningful? Yes, to Nina it was a debt repaid, a sister's sacrifice. To me it was an indictment of every promise we ever made. I felt my legs go limp, as though the floor itself wanted to swallow me whole. Steam rose from the coffee in front of Derek's hand, ghost-thin tendrils dancing in the golden light. I realized then that they all saw this baby. Our baby? No, someone else's baby, as more real than the marriage they walked into and casually dismantled. They spoke of we and us when referring to Talia and Derek's plans, as though my 6 years with her were a footnote. I forced myself to stand taller, folding my arms in front of me like a shield. "Planning? You think this is planning? This is obliteration." The word tasted harsh, but it was truth. You planned behind my back. You treated me like an obstacle to remove, not a partner to include. Did you think I'd thank you for making my own home unrecognizable? I looked at Nina, whose face was pale now, guilt and apology warring in her eyes. "Did you think I'd sit back and applaud your secret? This is our home. It's where our children learn to trust. How am I supposed to teach trust when you undermine it?" There was a moment of silence, thick and trembling, before Talia rose, her belly leading the way, fragile and resolute. She stood like a queen defending her realm, though the realm was foreign ground to me now. "You wouldn't have understood," she said, her voice softening. "You're not Nina. You're not Derek. You couldn't see why it mattered so much." She reached out, uncertain, as though pleading for me to close the gulf between us. I recoiled instinctively, the space between her hand and mine widening as if by contract. I met her eyes, searching for the partner I once loved, but found only the architect of my desolation. "I couldn't see why it mattered because you never told me to start with," I said. "You made decisions that reshape our family without giving me a single chance to say yes or no. You talk about this baby as a gift, but you stole something far more precious from me, the right to choose." Derek cleared his throat. He shifted on the couch, the leather creaking. "We never wanted to hurt you," he said. "Nina needed help. We thought it would make things easier, all of us together." His gaze slid to Nina, then back to me. "We thought you'd understand once the baby was here." His words sounded like excuses, hollow and rehearsed. I shook my head, fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it. "Understand? I don't need to understand how you justify betrayal. I need you to understand that no one hijacks someone else's life and calls it compassion." I turned toward Talia, whose eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. "You wanted to help your sister. Fine. Talk to me. Let me in. Ask for my support. But don't treat me like a signpost you can bypass when I stand in the wrong place." The afternoon sun dipped lower, lengthening shadows across the carpet. I saw Nina's shoulders slump, Derek's jaw tighten, and Talia finally lower her gaze. In that silent exchange, I understood that the wound ran deeper than any conversation could stitch. They believed they were doing good. I believed they were destroying me. And in that collision of intentions, there was no winner, only casualties. I backed toward the door and paused. "I'm leaving," I said. "I need air. And when I come back, I want answers." Without waiting for a response, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. The muffled hum of their voices followed me down the stairs, but I stayed on the porch, breathing in the crisp edge of evening air. The betrayal had begun not with needles or clinics, but with exclusion. One secret meeting at a time, and now it was my turn to decide whether reconciliation was even possible. I stared at the dimming sky and whispered to myself, this wasn't just a surrogacy. It was the unraveling of a promise, and I refused to be invisible any longer. I awoke to the clink of medicine bottles in the kitchen, the rattle of ice against glass, and the faint hum of Talia's voice drifting down the hallway. The morning light was pale, hesitant like it knew better than to break through our windows today. I sat up in bed, pulling the sheets around my shoulders, as though shielding myself from the invasion of our own home. 6 months of living together under the same roof, bound by legal necessity but divided by a cavern of secrets, had already eroded any warmth I once felt here. Now, even the mundane sounds of breakfast preparations felt like trespasses. I rose and tiptoed across the carpet, careful not to disturb the children's toys scattered along the hallway. Every step reminded me that this was the place I should belong, yet here I was an intruder, my opinions dismissed, my presence ignored. In the den, I found her, Talia at the counter, measuring syringes and vials of fertility medication as though preparing a sacred ritual. The fridge door lay open beside her, revealing rows of cartoon-labeled juice boxes, string cheese, and baby carrots. Our children's snacks, but also a neatly stacked pack of hormone injections, declared for Nina Fallon in bold print. The contrast twisted my stomach into knots. I cleared my throat, hoping she would pause, look up, include me. "What's next?" I ventured, voice small in the cavernous room. She didn't flick her eyes in my direction. She continued her calculations, jotting notes on a scrap of paper. "One more injection tonight, then blood work on Thursday," she said without looking up. Her tone was flat, rehearsed, as if she were reciting instructions from a script I had no part in. My spine stiffened, and I let out a slow breath. I had tried to ask questions, tried to engage her, but each time I was met with a sigh or a wave of her hand that dismissed me as though I were a buzzing fly. I stepped forward and placed my hand on her shoulder. The coolness of her shirt under my palm felt like steel. "I asked because I want to help," I said softly, but my words ricocheted off her shoulders and fell to the floor, unheard. She shrugged off my touch and reached for another vial. "I don't need help," she replied. "I need you to stay out of this." Her eyes were cold fire. I stared at the back of her head, the way her hair caught the morning light, the subtle curve of her neck. So familiar, yet I felt I was seeing a stranger. I withdrew my hand, bitterness rising behind my ribs. "Staying out has been your plan all along," I said. "You never asked how I felt. You never asked if I agreed." The words stung as they left my mouth, and I saw her pause, needle poised over the countertop. She glanced at me, lips pressed in a thin line. "I told you before," she said. "I didn't think you'd understand. You try to stop me." She returned her focus to the vials, but I felt a tremor in her hands. Maybe guilt, maybe anger, maybe regret. I moved to the fridge and closed the door, its soft click sounding like a verdict. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. I leaned against the fridge, feeling the glossy coolness seep through my shirt. "I want this marriage to survive," I said, though each word felt hollow. "But I can't build a future in a house where my voice doesn't matter." My confession hung in the still air. Then I saw the flashes of doubt in her eyes. She paused, inhaled sharply, and finally met my gaze. For a moment, I thought we might bridge the gap. The vulnerability that flickered in her expression reminded me of who she used to be. The woman who cried at movies, who held my hand during storms, who laughed without reservation in this very kitchen. But the flash faded as quickly as it came. She straightened, her posture stiffening into defiance. "Maybe we weren't strong to begin with," she said. The words fell like stones between us. She turned on her heel and carried the syringe back to the den entrance, as though marking the boundary where I was forbidden to cross. I stood frozen, the weight of her words threatening to pin me to the floor. My chest tightened, and a low ache spread through my limbs. I remembered the early days of our courtship, how we'd explore every corner of our home together, imagining paint colors for walls, building forts out of couch cushions, planning names for children we knew we'd eventually have. I remembered the warmth of her hand in mine, the way she'd catch my eye across a crowded room and smile with utter certainty that we belonged together. Now that certainty lay in ruins, replaced by the shards of her abandonment. I turned and walked down the hallway, the echo of my footsteps a lonely drumbeat. My office door stood ajar. Inside, I sank into my chair and stared at the blank screen of my laptop. I drafted an email to a lawyer the night before, sent it before dawn. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I tried to concentrate, but every image of Talia's cold dismissal intruded on my thoughts. The name of our neighborhood, the number on our mailbox, the photos on the walls. Each detail felt like evidence of a life that no longer recognized me. Hours later, the children came home from school, laughter tumbling through the front door. Their smiles lit the hallway like lanterns. My anger softened momentarily as I swept them into my arms, ruffling their hair and asking about the day's adventures. But even as I relished their company, I felt the echo of Talia's silence pulsing behind my ribcage. When my youngest reached for her mother's favorite cookie, a treat Talia had specially requested, I caught the empty plate in my hand. I saw the package of fertility meds half hidden behind the snacks, and rage kindled anew. I tossed the plate onto the counter, cracking its edge. Talia appeared seconds later, alarm and irritation warring on her face. She saw the broken plate and the prescription vial on the counter and understood without words. "You could have at least asked me not to do it here," I said, voice low but fierce. "You could have told me to move it. But you didn't, because you didn't want me involved." She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "No more talk. I've already made my choice." I turned toward the stairs, gathering the children in my arms. Upstairs, I tucked them into bed and kissed their foreheads. As I lingered in the doorway, I whispered promises to protect them, to rebuild our family on honesty rather than secrets. Then I closed their door gently and sat on the steps, the weight of solitude settling around me like a cloak. In that moment, I realized this house had become the arena for a war I never asked to fight. Talia had stored more than medicines here. She'd stored her loyalty beside our memories, and I had become the man who fought to reclaim both. I stood and faced the hallway, the walls lined with family photographs that had once been proud testaments to our unity. Now they bore witness to my isolation. I inhaled deeply and made my decision. Tomorrow I would call the lawyer again. I would file for separation. I would wrest back a home where my voice mattered. The path ahead was uncertain and painful, but I could no longer remain a ghost in my own house. As I extinguished the hallway light and descended the stairs, I steeled myself for the battle to come. This was the house where I wasn't heard. But soon enough, It would be the house where my voice could finally shatter the silence. I wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted me the moment I stepped through the front door. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, drawing long stripes across the plush rug, and there, right in the center of my living room, sat Derek Fallon, casually flipping through a stack of stroller catalogs while Talia and Nina hovered over him like excited spectators. Their heads bent together, murmuring about cup holders and convertible car seats, as if they were planning a weekend picnic instead of commandeering the heart of my home. My pulse slammed against my ribs, and the warm weight of my briefcase in my hand felt suddenly obscene. The children's toys were shoved to the corners, the coffee table cleared to make space for their display of glossy brochures. Baby carriers in dove gray and blush pink lay arranged in neat rows on the floor. A stripped-down playpen peeked out from behind the couch, and near the TV stand, a brand-new bassinet still bore its stickers of warning labels and assembly instructions. My living room, once a sanctuary of family movie nights and lazy Sundays, had become a showroom for someone else's joy. The familiarity of the furniture mocked me. The coffee-stained ottoman where my daughter once practiced her first steps, the worn armchair where I'd read bedtime stories. The throw pillows I'd tousled when my son begged for tickle fights. All of it reduced to backdrop for their celebration. I set my briefcase down with deliberate slowness, my fingers lingering on the leather handle as I watched Derek grin and point out adjustable handles. See this one? It reclines fully, and the canopy blocks UV rays. He looked up, smiled broadly, and waved me over as if I were a guest at a baby expo and not the betrayed husband who'd discovered this takeover. Come, sit, he said, patting the cushion beside him. We want your opinion. My jaw clenched. He was inviting me to bless what he and my wife had orchestrated behind my back, an invitation I felt naked refusing. I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. Why are you doing this here? The words sounded hollow in the cavernous room, but they cut through the chatter like a shout. Talia glanced at me, her face softening with a practiced apology, but Derek's expression remained buoyant. He leaned back, sliding his feet onto the coffee table. We just want to make sure Talia is comfortable, he said, flicking through another page. Here, in her own home, she'll feel safe. We can measure the space for the furniture, test the floor for the crib. It makes sense. Safe. I echoed. We live here. I'm her husband, supposedly her partner. Yet I arrive home to find you lounging on my couch, as if I don't exist. My voice rose, echoing off the walls, startling the children who peeked around the corner. Nina looked mortified and shrank back, but Talia pressed her hand against my arm in a feeble attempt at placation. I'm sorry, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't think. I silenced her with a raised hand. You didn't think, I repeated, tasting the conviction behind the accusation. You didn't think I'd mind, you didn't think to ask, and you didn't think my home was off limits. I gestured at the catalogs, at the bassinet, at Derek's oblivious feet on the table. You turned every corner of this house into a planning station for someone else's baby, someone else's family, without a single discussion. My gaze bore into Talia's, searching for traces of remorse. All I found was the flush of pregnancy and a determined set to her chin. Remorse had been left off the checklist. Derek rose, brushing crumbs of carpet lint from his jeans. We thought you'd understand, he said, voice congenial. We talked about it. You'll come around. It's for Nina. She can't carry herself. He placed a comforting hand on Talia's shoulder, as if his sincerity could smooth over the tension. I felt my control slipping, a cold fury rising like bile in my throat. Understand? I spat. You assume I'll cheerfully facilitate every step of your soft coup because it's for Nina? You treat my marriage like a public park. Open to anyone with a stroller and a plan. Talia's face crumpled, her hand dropping from my arm. Her eyes, once a source of warmth and comfort, now shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. I had loved those eyes, but today they mirrored the stranger who'd crafted her own narrative without me. She opened her mouth to defend herself, something about duty and family bonds, but no words could bridge the rift that widened with each syllable. You think I asked for this? She whispered, voice cracking. I didn't choose to feel this bond to my sister. I didn't choose to carry a child that wasn't ours. But I did it. She took a shaky breath. I did it to save her. I shook my head, heart pounding, feeling suddenly hollow. You did it to save her, but not our marriage. You saved someone else's family by dismantling ours. I picked up one of the catalogs and flipped to a page showing a convertible stroller system. Look at this, I said, voice low but fierce. See how it transforms? That's what you did to us, transformed my home into someone else's nursery. I tossed the catalog onto the couch. I won't be part of this showroom. If you want my help, then move your plans somewhere else. Derek's face reddened with offended surprise. We never meant to hurt you, he said, but his words sounded hollow, practiced like Talia's earlier apology. Nina needs this chance, and Talia wants to help. Doesn't that matter? He gestured between them, as though they formed a united front. But I saw the tremor in Talia's shoulders, the conflict between duty and love. I turned toward the hallway, pulling on my jacket. It matters deeply to me, I said, voice steady. But it matters that this is my home, and that you have no right to plan my family's future without my consent. I strode out the front door, leaving the stroller brochures fluttering in my wake like wounded birds. The late afternoon air hit me, crisp and unforgiving. I ran a hand through my hair, tasting the bitterness of betrayal. Their laughter, faint and apologetic, drifted behind me. I closed the door with a firmness I hadn't known I possessed. Inside, the living room reverted to silence, catalogs abandoned, bassinet unbuilt, a marriage unspooled. And outside, I breathed in the twilight, ready to fight for the life they tried to overwrite. Talia's pregnancy progressed like a silent storm brewing behind closed doors, imperceptible at first, then impossible to ignore. I watched as her body changed day by day, the faint rounding of her belly, the soft glow that once accompanied motherhood now tinged with fatigue and vulnerability. Yet even as her body carried new life, her heart hardened toward me. I found myself standing on the periphery of her own transformation, an unwelcome observer in my own home. She grew weary of the morning injections, the blood draws, and the endless rounds of checkups. One night, I found her slumped on the edge of our bed, her face pale and drawn, her hands clutching her side. I feel sick, she whispered, voice thick with nausea and frustration. I hovered beside her, torn between concern and the jagged edges of my own resentment. Do you need anything? I asked, but the words felt empty even as I spoke them. She shook her head, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. Call Derek, she said, voice quivering. He's the one who knows what to do. I stared at her, heart hammering. My wife, half asleep, half in pain, trusted another man's instincts before mine. I closed my eyes and fought the surge of anger. I can call the doctor, I replied, voice tight. I can drive you there. But she flinched. No, she said sharply. I don't want you involved. That word, involved, cut deeper than any blade. It wasn't about capability, it was about exclusion. In my own bedroom, at the darkest hour, I realized that my compassion, once boundless, had frayed into exhaustion. I wanted to hold her, to soothe her, to remind her that we were in this together. But the bond that tethered us had been severed, and she sought comfort only in the hands of our would-be in-laws. I slipped quietly from the room, leaving her to summon Derek's name into the night. As weeks passed, her demands increased. When she complained of back pain, she refused my offers to massage her shoulders. When she craved pickles and ice cream at 2 a.m, she rolled over and dialed Nina's number. When the baby's first fluttering kicks brought tears of joy to her eyes, she reached for her sister's hand, leaving mine empty. Every small gesture of tenderness I attempted met a silent wall of indifference. One afternoon, Talia's mother called. Her voice crackled through the speaker, heavy with panic and sorrow. Have you heard from Talia? She asked. She's not answering my texts. I realized in that instant how far removed we had become. The mother who once counseled me about parenthood now pleaded with me as though I were a stranger. She's resting, I said softly, careful to shield my own anger. She's fine. But her mother's next words carried the weight of accusation. You have to support her, Marcus. She's doing this for Nina. Your sister-in-law. My jaw clenched. I'm not involved, I said, voice hollow. I'm not obligated to this. The line went silent, and then her mother's voice broke with tears. You're heartless. I didn't argue. I hung up and deleted her number. I moved through our home like a ghost, every room a reminder of what Talia had stolen. In the den, the fertility meds sat beside my children's juice boxes, labels facing forward like specters of our fractured trust. In the kitchen, the grocery list included prenatal vitamins and unsalted crackers, items I once purchased with love, now reminders of my displacement. In our bedroom, the monogrammed bedding lay disarranged, as though protesting the absence of warmth. Each space echoed with recent memory, a painful cacophony in the hush of our house. My own parents called, too, checking in on Talia's health and offering condolences for the stress of carrying a surrogate child. I thanked them, though their concern struck me as absurd. Why should they comfort me for someone else's choice? I scrolled through voicemails from distant friends and extended family, each message droning on about altruism and family duty. They viewed Talia as a hero, a martyr to the cause of sisterly love. They saw my refusal to acquiesce as cruelty. Their opinions weighed on me like chains, but I refused to pick up the heavy links. When the midwife suggested I accompany Talia to her next appointment, I felt the familiar ache of exclusion. It would be helpful, the midwife said over the phone. You're her husband. I stared at the receiver, my reflection wavering in the glossy finish. I wanted to agree, to prove that I still cared, but I couldn't escape the bitterness. I'll pass, I said. I have work. I replaced the phone and watched her back disappear down the hallway. I heard her bedroom door close softly, sealing me out once more. By the time Talia reached her 7th month, her needs and demands felt like the tide pulling me under. She called me dramatic when I refused to stock the house with her pregnancy books and herbal teas. She called me selfish when I insisted she handle her own medical bills, which had mysteriously landed in my joint account. She called me heartless when I turned away from her tearful pleas for help with her incessant back spasms. With each accusation, I felt my compassion draining from me, replaced by a cold calculus. I would give only what she deserved. One evening, I returned home to find our living room transformed yet again. Boxes of maternity clothes collapsed in a pile, open on the floor, a heap of unassembled nursery furniture in the corner. A solitary rocking chair positioned awkwardly beneath the window. Talia stood amid the chaos, tears streaming down her face, her frame racked with exhaustion. She looked at me with desperate eyes and whispered, I can't do this alone. My heart twisted at the admission, for behind that plea lay the power to reach me, to remind me of the love we once shared. I stepped forward, hesitant, and laid a hand on her trembling shoulder. I never intended to leave you alone, I said, voice gentle. You excluded me, over and over. I felt like a stranger. She sank to her knees, burying her face in my chest, and I felt the storm inside her: pain, guilt, fear. I drew her close, wrapping my arms around her, and for a brief moment, felt the warmth of our past return. But as her tears soaked through my shirt, I remembered all the times I reached out and was rebuffed. I remembered her mother's venomous phone calls and her sister's triumphant grin when she announced their baby. I held her, yes, but I couldn't allow myself to be ensnared again. I'll help you, I whispered, but this has to be our journey. We can't keep rebuilding on the wreckage of secrets. She pulled back, eyes red but resolute, and nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered. I see it now. And in that fragile confession, I saw the flicker of something precious: accountability. It was the first step toward healing, however jagged. But healing demanded change. I looked at her rounded belly and felt the paradox of my heart: love and betrayal intertwined. I kissed her forehead and stood. Tomorrow, I said softly, we start fresh. We'll call the lawyer and redefine our boundaries. And we'll plan together, if you still want me there. Her lips trembled into a smile, and I recognized the wife I once married. Yet I also knew that forgiveness was a landscape we would traverse slowly, with caution. I would remain cold enough to protect my heart, but open enough to love again, if she proved herself worthy of that grace. In the silence of our living room, amid scattered boxes and forgotten hopes, we took that first fragile step together. The night air hung heavy as I turned the key in the deadbolt and slipped inside our darkened house, each step echoing against walls that had once felt warm with life. I just pulled into the driveway after a late meeting, my mind still swirling with reports and spreadsheets, when I heard the frantic thud of Talia's footsteps behind me. I barely had time to lock the door before she slammed into it from the other side, her silhouette a frantic blur of curves and labor. Panic flared through me like wildfire. Her face was pale moonlight, her breath ragged and urgent. Marcus, she gasped, her hand pressed against the wood between us. Please, let me in. Behind her, the hallway stretched into darkness, serrated by the soft blue glow of the night light we'd installed for the kids. But now the light only highlighted the terror in her eyes, the tremor in her lips. I fumbled the lock, hands shaking. The door snapped open and she staggered in, clutching her belly as if it were a precious burden and a curse all at once. Her shirt was damp with sweat, the fine hairs at her temples plastered to her skin. Her voice trembled, a plea I should have welcomed, but met instead with confusion and dread. "Derek's not answering," she panted, as though that explained everything. "Nina's sick. I can't, please." She collapsed against the doorframe, her legs folding beneath her. I dropped my briefcase and knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. Cold and slick, it trembled against my palm. "Call an ambulance," I managed, my voice rough with shock. She shook her head, her hair falling across her face. "No, no ambulance. You promised you'd call Derek. He knows what to do." The conviction in her tone cut me deeper than any blade. I swallowed the retort that rose in my throat. Promised? When had I promised anything more than basic decency? I looked around the living room. Stroller catalogs lay strewn across the couch, the brand-new bassinet still unassembled in the corner, and the playpen slouched against the wall. This house was no longer ours alone. It had been converted into ground zero for someone else's family affair. But now, in this moment of crisis, it was just a place of fear and need. "Talia," I said softly, brushing the hair away from her face. "You need help now. You can't wait for someone who won't answer." I reached for my phone, but she slapped it away with surprising strength. Her eyes, wild and desperate, met mine as though searching for betrayal in my gaze. "Please," she whispered. "Not him." Her voice cracked, and I felt the frail threads of our bond tighten under the weight of her desperation. I rose, adrenaline surging through me, and grabbed my keys. "I'm calling one," I said firmly, pressing the emergency button. The shrill ring of the dispatcher pulled us both into reality. I spoke in clipped sentences: name, address, situation. Her breathing quickened. In the background, I heard the soft beep of machinery, our kids' monitor echoing their peaceful sleep. They lay secluded in their rooms, unaware of the storm brewing downstairs. I bit back tears at the injustice. Talia had willingly chosen to carry this child, yet now, when she needed me most, her allegiance seemed divided. Then again, maybe it had always been. The dispatcher gave instructions: lay her down, loosen her shirt, monitor contractions. I followed each step as though I were reading from a manual I didn't understand. Talia's eyes fluttered shut, her forehead creased with pain. "It's coming," she murmured. And I realized she meant not just the baby, but all the pent-up anguish of betrayal and abandonment that had settled between us. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. I knelt again, cradling her hand, willing my presence to soothe the agony writhed across her face. She squeezed my fingers, her eyes locking onto mine, and in that silent contact I glimpsed the woman I once loved, brave, compassionate, the sister who gave her body for family. But I also saw the stranger who had excluded me at every turn. Moments later, 2 paramedics burst through the front door, efficient and calm amidst the chaos. They guided Talia onto a stretcher, their practiced hands steadying her. I hovered at their side, offering useless reassurances. "I'm her husband," I told them. "She's in labor 8 months along." They nodded, their questions direct, their touch professional. I watched them strap her in, adjust her foreline, place oxygen over her face. She looked at me then, panic ebbing into regret. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, her voice barely a breath. I forced a nod, torn between relief that she was safe and fury at the price I had paid to get here. She was mine, no matter the mistakes she made. She was mine. Outside, the ambulance doors shut, and the lights cast a flickering glow across our driveway. I placed my hand on the window as the paramedics lifted the stretcher in. Talia's face appeared in the glass, torn between gratitude and pain. She mouthed something. "I love you." Or was it "help me"? The doors shut, silencing her voice. My chest contracted, the sirens receding into the night, leaving me alone on the porch with the hush of abandoned stroller catalogs behind me. I sank to the top step, the wood rough beneath my palms. My mind raced. What if complications arose? What if the baby came early, with no father to claim it? What if my children woke and found their mother gone, carried off by strangers in blinking red lights? I rocked back and forth as the dispatcher's final words drifted through the open door: "Stay on the line until they arrive at the hospital." I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to the flat cadence of her voice. The minutes crawled into eternity as I waited for real versus planned family dramas. When the ambulance returned with nothing but an empty stretcher, I knew she was in capable hands. I rose unsteadily and re-entered the house, each step heavier than the last. The living room lay in disarray, a testament to the storm of secrets that had brewed here. The catalogs were scattered as though shaken by an earthquake, the playpen unfolded and half-assembled, the bassinet's instructions carelessly discarded. I collected them one by one, folding each pamphlet and placing it in a neat stack on the coffee table. It felt absurd, taming chaos as though it were within my power to do so. But I needed something to do. Then I remembered the baby monitor on the console. My children were asleep, trusting their mother's lullabies and father's kisses to guard their dreams. I tiptoed to the console and adjusted the volume, listening to their soft breathing. A swell of guilt washed over me. I had focused so much on a child not mine that I had forgotten the ones who were. Their world remained intact, for now, even as mine teetered on the brink. I promised myself I would protect it. I sank onto the couch and closed my eyes, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Regret and resolve wove together inside my chest. When the paramedics called me with news of a healthy baby girl, tears stung my eyes despite the months of hardness I had cultivated. I realized in that moment that betrayal did not erase love, no matter how deep the wound. I whispered a vow into the hush. I would be there for Talia, for this baby, mine by the bonds of marriage, if not by conception. And for our children. I would brace this home against further storms. And when Talia returned, I would face her locked doors and labor pains hand in hand, no longer as strangers, but as partners once more, standing together at the threshold of forgiveness. When Talia finally returned home, she carried in her arms a small bundle wrapped in pastel blankets, Nina and Derek's daughter, already the centerpiece of a family that didn't include me. The hallway lights cast a soft glow on the hardwood floors, highlighting the sharp contrast between the warmth of that infant's wail and the emptiness echoing in my chest. She stepped over the threshold as though crossing into someone else's domain, her footsteps tentative. The instant the door clicked shut behind her, I felt the chill of exclusion settle over me once more. She paused mid-step, cradling the tiny head against her shoulder, and offered me a weary smile. "I brought her home," she said, voice trembling. The words should have fluttered joyfully on the air, but instead they thudded against my ribs like stones. She set the baby down in the hallway, on the edge of the carpet where the rug met the hardwood, and crouched beside her. The baby's legs curled in reflex, arms waving in tiny arcs as if searching for comfort. Talia's eyes shone with fatigue and a glimmer of pride that jarred against the ruin she'd wrought. I hovered in the doorway to the living room, arms crossed, as if the distance would protect me from the tidal wave of betrayal that still coursed through my veins. "You promised me we'd talk before she came home," I said quietly. My voice echoed in the narrow space. The baby cooed, a soft gurgle that seemed utterly unconcerned with the adult conflict unfolding just inches away. Talia's gaze flicked to me, an apology caught in her eyes before she turned back to the child. "I know," she whispered, "but the hospital wouldn't release us both. Nina was still recovering. Derek was traveling for work. They said I could bring her here, and he'd pick her up tomorrow." She reached out to the infant, smoothing back a tuft of fine hair. The baby's eyelids fluttered, then opened in dark, curious pools. She gazed around the hallway as though sizing up her new kingdom. I felt a pang of tenderness and guilt that I wasn't the one holding her. My children's laughter came from their bedrooms down the hall, a distant lullaby I had neglected lately. I realized then that I had built walls around my heart to keep out pain, but those walls also shut out every possibility of healing. Talia looked up at me, eyes raw. "I thought you'd want to meet her," she said haltingly. "I thought you'd—" Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. I rubbed my jaw, trying to find a bridge over the gulf between us. "I do," I said finally. "I want to meet her. But not like this, in the hallway. This is my home, our home. I want her to come in." I stepped forward, careful not to startle the baby. Talia lifted the child into her arms, rising to her feet. The baby wrapped her tiny fingers around Talia's shirt, as though staking her claim. I nodded toward the living room, sweeping an arm in invitation. Talia hesitated, then carried the child inside, settling onto the couch that had once been ours alone. I knelt beside her, heart pounding. The baby's gaze found mine and her lips curved in a miniature, inscrutable smile. My breath caught. In that moment, she wasn't Nina's daughter or Talia's surrogate child. She was simply a vulnerable human being, needing care and love. I reached out a trembling hand and touched her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. The baby blinked, tracking my finger with drowsy interest. I swallowed, fighting the lump in my throat. "Hi," I whispered. "I'm Marcus." My voice trembled. The baby cooed again, her tiny fist clenching around my thumb. A warmth spread through me I hadn't felt since before the betrayal, a flicker of paternal instinct that demanded expression. Talia watched me, her expression unreadable. I looked up at her. "She's beautiful," I said softly. Talia exhaled a shuddering sigh. Tears glimmered on her lashes. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm sorry it had to be this way." I nodded, studying her face. She looked older now. Tired, marked by guilt and regret. I realized she had paid a price I couldn't fully comprehend. I closed my eyes and let a single tear slip down my cheek. The baby's cry rose suddenly, sharp and insistent, drawing me back. I eased the child into my arms, cradling her body against my chest. She shifted, curling her legs into my side, and buried her face in my shirt. I rocked her gently, one hand supporting her head, the other resting above her tiny ribs. With each sway, her wails softened to hiccups, then to settled breathing. Talia sat quietly beside me, watching the scene she had orchestrated. I glanced at her. "I want to help," I said, voice low. "I know it's not my baby, but she's here now." Talia nodded, relief mingling with apprehension on her face. "I thank you," she whispered. "I didn't," her voice faltered. I raised a finger, silencing her. "No more excuses," I said gently. "Just let me be here." She exhaled, leaning back against the couch cushion. "Okay," she said. "Please." I shifted the baby so my free hand could secure a diaper bag at my feet. I rummaged through it, wipes, diapers still with price tags, a swaddle blanket, and laid them across my lap. The baby nestled against me, riding the swell of her own contentment. I changed her diaper with deft, careful movements, cherishing each moment of normalcy. Talia crossed her arms over her belly, watching me with a wary hope. I finished and wrapped the baby in the blanket, then lifted her back into my arms. The infant yawned, eyes closing, and I sang softly, a half-forgotten lullaby I'd sung to our own children. My voice was rough, but the baby's lips curved at the corners. I looked up at Talia. She exhaled a quiet laugh. "You remember," she said, voice thick. I nodded. "Some things you never forget." The three of us sat in a fragile peace. A mother relieved to see her child soothed, a father rediscovering his capacity for care, and an infant too young to grasp the tangled tensions that lay beneath. The hallway lights dimmed as evening deepened outside, and the living room lamp cast a golden pool around us. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I stood, rocking the baby gently, and moved toward the kitchen. Talia followed. I reached for a bottle and warmed formula on the stove, careful not to scald the milk. Talia leaned against the doorframe, watching me perform each step with focused intent. When I handed the bottle to the baby, she latched on with hungriness I recognized from our own children. I held her upright against my chest, patting her back as she drank. The rhythm was soothing, a balm to the jagged edges of my heart. Talia approached quietly, reaching out to steady the baby in my arms. Our hands met briefly, fingers brushing, a contact that spoke of forgiveness and the tentative rebuilding of trust. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw the reflection of my own vulnerability. "Thank you," she said softly. "For this." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me in." The baby finished her bottle and drifted into sleep, eyelids fluttering before closing. I carried her back to the couch and laid her beside Talia, tucking the blanket around her. Talia brushed back a stray lock of hair from the baby's forehead. I stood beside them, the three of us forming a new tableau in our living room. Despite everything that had happened, I believed this moment held a promise, that families, however fractured, could find a way to heal, one small act of care at a time. The morning sun found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by a flurry of unopened mail, each envelope bearing the scrawl of family members and friends who once felt like kin. I read the messages in a daze, my mother's heartbreak plea, my in-laws' venomous condemnation, Nina's tearful apology, Derek's awkward offer of brunch. They all painted me as the villain, the heartless husband who had abandoned his pregnant wife and stolen a sister's chance at motherhood. Each word felt like a blow, a fresh incision reopened. I folded the last letter and slipped it into the recycling bin, resolve hardening within me like forged steel. I would not bow to their collective outrage, for I knew that in this battle I had done nothing but defend the sanctity of my family. My lawyer's voice crackled through the speakerphone, reviewing the final motions being submitted to the court. Unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, fertility clinic invoices, overnight shipping fees, unapproved medical expenses, all traced back to forged signatures meant to keep me in the dark. It felt surreal to accuse the woman I loved most of deception so calculated, but every document bore her handwriting, every transaction a testament to her betrayal. I listened as my lawyer outlined the request for primary custody of our 3 kids, the elimination of spousal support, and partial repayment of misused funds. Her words were clinical, but my heart pounded with vindication. At last, someone recognized the truth I had fought to expose. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and late afternoon light. I sat beside my lawyer, shoulders squared, watching the gallery fill with family members who regarded me with silent fury. My mother sat at the front, arms crossed, tears staining her cheeks. Talia's sister Ellen lingered in the back, her stare accusatory as though I were on trial for a crime more heinous than any surrogacy scheme. Derek sat beside her, his posture stiff, as if bracing for a verdict he knew would not go his way. I felt the weight of every disapproving gaze but refused to flinch. I had prepared for this moment, armed with evidence and the unwavering belief that my actions were justified. When the judge entered, the room fell into a quiet hush. Her presence was commanding yet fair. She would not be swayed by sob stories or familial pressure. My lawyer presented the forged documents first, laying out a timeline of secrecy and betrayal. Each exhibit elicited a murmur from the crowd. My mother's gasp, Talia's hand over her mouth, Nina's shoulders trembling. Then came the medical bills, the expense reports, the careful ledger of money withdrawn without my consent. I watched the judge's expression remain impassive, as though she weighed each fact against the sanctity of marriage itself. In that moment, I felt the tension inside my chest ease, a flicker of hope igniting. Talia took the witness stand with composed dignity. She spoke of sisterly love, of the altruism that drove her to carry Nina's baby, of the guilt that had kept her from telling me. Her voice trembled only twice, when she described her labor alone, and when she admitted forging my signature. I glanced at her, saw genuine remorse in her eyes, but also the pride she still carried for her sacrifice. The judge asked sharp questions about my exclusion, about the unilateral decisions that had reshaped their lives. Talia's answers faltered, the carefully constructed defense crumbling under scrutiny. Then it was my turn to address the court. I stood, feeling the eyes of every family member on me, bracing for their judgment. I spoke truthfully but without rancor, describing the emptiness I'd felt as a husband cut out of his own marriage, the helpless rage that came from finding my home repurposed without my knowledge, the betrayal that no apology could erase. I spoke of my children, my daughters and son who deserved parents united by honesty, not secrets. My voice rang clear, echoing off the high ceilings. I saw heads nodding, felt the shift in the room as my words pierced the facade of sacrificial righteousness. When the judge delivered her ruling, her gavel fell like a final reckoning. No spousal support, no financial responsibility for the surrogate baby, primary custody of my 3 children, partial restitution of the misused funds. The silence in the courtroom was seismic. My mother looked away, Talia wept quietly, and Nina burst into tears that were neither joyous nor comforting but deeply lamented. Derek's face reddened. He avoided my gaze. The judge offered only a brief apology for their ordeal, then dismissed us. As we filed out, the lack of protest spoke volumes. My quiet strength had outmatched their tearful appeals. Outside the courthouse, the spring air carried the scent of new beginnings. I stepped onto the plaza, adjusting my tie with deliberate calm. Reporters' cameras flashed, expecting a desperate soundbite, but I turned and walked the other way, past lines of judgmental stares, toward the car where my children waited. Behind me, I heard Derek's hesitant footsteps, a soft apology begging for recognition. I paused, but did not turn. The wounds from Talia's betrayal ran too deep for reconciliation to come so easily. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. When I slid into the back seat and saw my children's bright faces, relief bloomed in my chest. Their arms shot around me, and I felt the raw joy of fatherhood return. "Daddy," they chorused, innocent and unfailingly loving. I held them close, inhaling their scent, the familiar cotton of their clothes, the promise of tomorrow they represented. All around us, the world might still blame me, call me ruthless, monster, heartless. But as I looked into my children's eyes, I knew I had done right. Betrayal did not deserve kindness. Choices came with consequences. I had stood firm, and in doing so, I reclaimed the family that mattered most. And in their arms, I found my greatest vindication. I heard the car pull into the driveway before I saw it. Its engine's low rumble a reminder that life moved on outside these walls, indifferent to the storm that raged within. I sat alone in the den, its windows dark with solitude, the faint glow of the hallway light illuminating the letter I held in my trembling hand. It was Talia's final plea, a confession of regret and a promise to make things right. I'd read it 3 times already, searching for the spark of the woman I once trusted, only to find that her words carried the same weight as smoke, visible for a moment, then gone with the next breath. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the side table, the crease of my refusal already pressed into its center. A soft knock at the front door shattered the quiet. My heart skewed between hope and dread as I rose, each step toward the entrance a deliberate act of resolve. There, framed by the porch light, stood Talia, her suitcase at her feet, the baby draped in a sling across her chest, and her face etched with desperation. Tears pooled in her dark eyes, glistening like fragile gems. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of her own choices had shrunk her. I swallowed hard, steeling myself against the ache that threatened to betray my composure. "Please," she whispered as I opened the door, her voice cracking. "Don't go through with the divorce. I'll fix it." Her outstretched arm trembled, the baby nestled against her, secure but oblivious to the fracture beneath. I saw the hopeful flicker in her gaze. An echo of the wife who once believed we could conquer anything together. But that wife was gone, replaced by someone who redefined loyalty without my knowledge. I drew a slow breath, allowing the cool night air to flood my lungs and sharpen my clarity. "Fix it how?" I asked quietly. The words cut the space between us like a blade. "Take the baby back? Unforge the signatures? Undo the months of lies? What exactly am I supposed to fix?" My voice remained steady, though the question carried all the pain I felt. The porch light revealed the exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of her regret. She swallowed and lifted the baby slightly, as if offering me refuge in the infant's innocence. I can change everything," she stammered. "I'll tell them, everyone, that I was wrong. I'll apologize. Her voice fractured on another sob. I closed the door slowly, the click echoing a finality she had refused to give herself. The porch light dimmed as the hallway light brightened, casting my face in hard relief. "Talia," I said, turning away for a moment to collect my thoughts. The letter on the side table caught my eye, its neat handwriting mocking me with promises that had already failed. I inhaled, turning back to face her. "You gave Nina everything," I said softly, the words landing in the humid night air. "And in doing so, you left nothing for us." My shoulders sagged with the weight of unspoken memories, our wedding vows, the birth of our children, the impromptu dance in the kitchen at midnight. All of it felt stolen. She stepped forward, suitcase trailing behind her on the weathered wood. "I know I hurt you," she said, tears streaming freely now. "But I never stopped loving you. I need you. We can rebuild together." She reached out, hand trembling as it hovered above my arm. I flinched, as though her touch might reopen every wound she'd inflicted. The baby nestled closer, its soft coo a tender counterpoint to our shattered world. I watched the child's innocent gaze, felt my own heart threaten to betray me with compassion. But I couldn't let that override justice. I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of the table, centering myself. "Love isn't enough when it's built on deception," I replied, voice hushed but firm. "You chose another family over mine. You lied to me, forged my name, and turned our home into a secret nursery. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our marriage, our vows, our children." The words echoed in the hallway, refusing to be softened. Talia's breaths hitched, her body shuddering. The baby cooed once more, stretching its tiny fingers toward her mother's necklace. She bent, scooping up the suitcase and clutching it to her chest as though it were a lifeline. "I understand," she whispered, voice raw. "I know I can't ask for forgiveness right now. But please, don't hate me." Her gaze fell to her feet, The porch boards beneath her shoes splintered and scarred like the remnants of our past. She glanced at the baby, tears flooding her vision. I love her so much, Marcus. She's our niece, but she matters more than you know. But I can't lose you too. Her plea lingered between us, vulnerable and agonizing. I inhaled, the night's stillness pressing in. My heart fractured between sorrow and resolve. I stepped aside, opening a path down the hallway toward the front door. I don't hate you, I said quietly. The words surprised both of us. I'm not a monster, but I'm done. I can't keep saving you from your choices, from yourself. You knew there would be consequences. I placed a hand gently on her arm, offering a final gesture of compassion sliced with steel. Go. Take what you need. Figure out who you are outside of this betrayal. When you're ready to face me honestly, without secrets, then we'll talk. She exhaled, her shoulders collapsing as though relief and grief united to pull her down. She nodded once, voice choked. Okay. She bent to gather her shoes and suitcase, then paused at the threshold. Her lips parted as though to speak again, but no words came. She wrapped the baby to her chest, stepping out into the night. I closed the doors softly behind her, leaving a thin line of darkness between us. In the hush that followed, I sank onto the couch in the den, the letter forgotten beside me. The baby's coo drifted faintly in the distance as Talia carried her away, into her parents' home, into Nina's circle of support, away from everything I had once believed was ours. The silence afterward was the loudest peace I'd ever known. The absence of betrayal was a quiet that rang clearer than any promise. And as I sat alone, the empty hallway stretching before me, I realized that sometimes the fiercest act of love is to let go. I watched the empty driveway from the den window, the asphalt still warm under the late afternoon sun, and felt a curious calm settle over me. The frenzy of court dates, the tumult of betrayal, and the raw ache of abandoned promises had given way to a quieter victory, the reclamation of my family's peace. My 3 children played in the yard, their laughter rising in bright arcs over the fence, oblivious to the silent war waged behind closed doors. My chest swelled with a fierce protectiveness as I closed the drapes and turned away, determined to rebuild on the ruins of what once was. In the living room, the stroller catalogs lay neatly stacked on the coffee table, their glossy pages no longer weapons in the struggle for control but relics of a life I refused to inhabit. The playpen and bassinet had been returned weeks ago, packed away in the garage where they belonged, tools for someone else's family. Even the faint scent of fertility meds that had once lingered in the den had faded, replaced by the comforting aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I poured a mug and carried it to the couch, settling into the worn cushions that had cradled so many childhood memories. The quiet was unfamiliar, but no longer unwelcome. My phone buzzed on the side table, and I glanced at the screen. A text from my lawyer confirming the final court documents had been filed and closed. I typed back a simple "thank you," then set the phone aside. No more legal battles, no more phone calls demanding explanations or apologies. The judge's ruling had shifted more than assets and custody, it had shifted the balance of power back to my hands. And with that shift came the hard-won knowledge that I could survive betrayal without losing myself. Footsteps approached, light and hurried. My youngest daughter bounded into the room, clutching her beloved stuffed rabbit. She flung herself onto my lap, her small arms tightening around me. "Daddy, play with me," she demanded, her eyes bright with expectation. I smiled down at her, feeling the soft tickle of her curls against my chin. "What shall we play today?" I asked, warming instantly to her energy. She bounced on my knee. "Tea party. You're the bear. I'm the bunny." I chuckled, setting aside my coffee cup and gathering her into my arms. In moments like these, I felt the purest joy, uncomplicated and full of love. Her siblings soon joined us, the 3 of them arranging their plastic cups and saucers on the coffee table. My son took charge of pouring tea from an empty pot, his serious expression betraying the importance of his task. I played along, growling softly as the bear, and sipping from the pretend cup. Their laughter filled the room, buoyant and unrestrained, and I savored every note. This was my family, our family, untouched by the shadows of what had happened just weeks before. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, I wandered through the house, flicking on lights room by room. The playroom glowed with pastel colors, the kitchen gleamed with freshly washed dishes, and the bedrooms were tucked in neat rows of pillows and blankets. I paused in the hallway outside my bedroom and sighed, remembering the nights I'd lain awake beside Talia, trapped in a bed of lies. Now the mattress felt spacious, honored by honest rest rather than haunted by secret plans. I stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed, the cotton sheets cool beneath my fingertips. Memories surfaced unbidden, the day Talia first announced her plan, the sting of that revelation, the hush of the din as I folded laundry unaware of the storm brewing around me. I recalled the courtroom, the hush when the judge delivered her verdict, the echo of her gavel that had sounded like liberation. I thought of Talia's tearful apology at the porch, her whispered pleas as I closed the door behind her, leaving her to face her choices alone. Guilt nibbled at me, but I reminded myself that betrayal begged no mercy. I had acted to protect my children and myself, and in that act, I had rediscovered my capacity to draw boundaries. I rose and moved back through the house to the den, where I'd left my coffee cup. I wrapped my palms around the warm ceramic and looked at the framed photographs on the shelf. Our wedding day, our children's births, vacations under golden skies. Each image told a story we still shared, even if one chapter had ended in heartbreak. I traced the edge of a photograph, my daughter's first birthday cake smeared across her face, and smiled. Life was messy and unpredictable, but it was ours to shape. A soft click made me turn. My brother-in-law Derek stood in the doorway, boots tapping lightly on the carpet. He held a folded card in his hand. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't close the door either. He took a breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he stammered. For everything. For not seeing it sooner. His eyes welled with genuine remorse. He held out the card. I took it without a word. Inside, Nina and he had scrawled apologies and congratulations on the new home we were shaping without them. I closed the card and set it on the table. I'm glad to hear that, I said quietly. I hope you meant it. He nodded, shifting his weight. We did. We're learning. We'll give you space. But if you need anything, help with the kids, advice, you know where to find me. I studied his face, saw the earnest regret there, and after a moment I nodded. Thank you, I said. He offered a small, grateful smile and left without another word. I closed the door behind him and leaned against its surface. The hush returned, but it felt lighter, filled with possibilities rather than threats. I returned to the den, lifting my coffee cup in a silent toast to the empty room, empty of resentment, at least for now. Tomorrow, I would wake to another day of fatherhood, of work, of laughter, and the occasional sadness that life inevitably brings. But I would face it on my own terms, fortified by the knowledge that I could withstand any storm. In the days that followed, I set new routines: Wednesday pancake nights with the kids, Saturday soccer practice for my son, bedtime rituals for my daughters with stories of far-off lands. I rebuilt my home with laughter rather than secrets, with openness rather than walls. The shadow of Talia's betrayal grew fainter with each passing sunrise, until it became a lesson rather than a wound. People might still whisper behind my back, call me ruthless or heartless. But I knew who I was: a protector, a father, a man who refused to be defined by someone else's betrayals. And so I moved forward, cherishing the peace that comes not from perfection, but from the courage to say no to deception and yes to truth. I was not a monster. I was simply done with betrayal, with silence, with being unseen. In that clarity, I found freedom. And as I stared out the window at the sun setting behind my children's laughter, I knew that this home, my home, would never again be a place of shadows. It would be a sanctuary of honesty, where love, though imperfect, could endure.